Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our cooperation event, Germany's Zeitenwende and the National Security. First of all, I would like to thank you for coming out tonight. And of course, I'd like to thank our colleagues from the German-American Institute in Saarbrücken, Bruno von Lutz, and the Miami University John E. Dolleboy European Center in Luxembourg for their great cooperation. This is the first of a series of events in which we will explore the impact of Russian aggression against Ukraine on national, European, and transatlantic relations. I would also like to thank the Embassy of the United States for their generous financial support of this series of events. Before I introduce you to our speaker today, and we can start the discussion, here are a few technical remarks. First of all, please feel free and welcome to join the discussion with questions and remarks. Since we are using a moderated chat, please write your questions in the input area at the bottom right. I will be happy to take up the questions and comments and incorporate them into the discussion. This event will be recorded. However, your personal data will not be recorded. So this platform is GDPR compliant. But now to our today's topic and speaker. Dr. Georg Löfflmann is Assistant Professor in US Foreign Policy at Queen Mary University of London. Previously, he was an assistant professor in war studies and US foreign policy at the Politics and International Studies at the University of Warwick. And he has worked extensively on the grand strategy of the United States and the forthcoming German language edited volume, Deutschlands Verteidigungspolitik, Germany's Defense Policy. It deals with national security policy after the Zeitenwende. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Georg Löfflmann. Georg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So the title for this talk is slightly tongue-in-cheek or provocative one, Germany's Zeitenwende and National Security, Wind of Change or Hot Air. So is there actually a there when we talk about the Zeitenwende? Now, the structure for this talk that I had in mind is part one is a little bit of an historical overview over the development in the Bundeswehr, in particular from its founding in the 1950s throughout the Cold War. Then the second part is a bit the current state, if you will, of German security and defense policy, in particular the state of the German armed forces after a 20-year plus peace dividend, which has in many ways eroded German combat readiness, many capabilities. And then following on, of course, from Scholz's now famous Zeitenwende speech, which found a very wide and positive echo, both in domestically, but also international media, and what actually has happened as part of this Zeitenwende or this historic turnaround of German foreign security and defense policy. All right, so let's start with part one. How did we get here? Now, the Bundeswehr, the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Germany, were established on the 12th of November 1955. And this date was very deliberately chosen because it is indeed the 200th birthday of the Prussian military reformer von Scharnhorst. And it was this idea that the Prussian military reformers were one of the lines of tradition for this new military. Now, less than 10 years after the Second World War and the devastation that German armed forces and German soldiers has wrought over the European continent, it was only in the context of the Cold War, of course, and the feared attack, possible attack of the Soviet Union, of the Warsaw Pact on Western Europe, that actually was the reason that rearmament happened in the first place. And there we already have part of what made the Bundeswehr special. So the Bundeswehr was stood up to be a purely territorial defensive force. And the Bundeswehr was sole purpose was to deter a potential Soviet attack on Western Europe. The Bundeswehr was also to be fully integrated into NATO structures. And like a layer cake, if you can see here this map of Western Germany, the job of the West German Bundeswehr was to essentially link up with Belgian, Dutch, American, British, and French forces for the defense of Western Germany and Western Europe. And in order to fulfill this task, the Bundeswehr would eventually grow into a truly massive force of 500,000 soldiers, 12 army divisions, thousands of modern Leopard main battle tanks, first the Leopard 1, then the Leopard 2, Marder infantry fighting vehicles, and the Cold War American historian John Lewis Gaddis, for example, referred to the Bundeswehr as maybe the biggest and maybe the best army in NATO during the high point of the Cold War. The Bundeswehr would also field hundreds of fighter and fighter bombers and capable naval forces, in particular in the Baltic Sea. So we had a very large, heavily armored force, however, a force that was only there to stop this potential attack. As the German phrase was, kämpfen können, nicht kämpfen zu müssen. We can fight, or we know how to fight in order we don't have to fight. At the same time, the Bundeswehr was supposed to be unlike any other German armed force that had come before it. It was not supposed to be in the tradition, or indeed was not continuing any tradition, of the imperial army of the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm I and Wilhelm II, not like the Reichswehr of the Weimar Republic, and certainly not like the Wehrmacht that had sworn a personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. And in order to constitute this new army as the army of democratic, liberal Germany, several principles were instituted. First and foremost was that this new German army was made up of soldiers that were citizens in uniform. In other words, the armed forces were not supposed to be a state within a state, but they were supposed to be infused by the democratic and liberal values of the Federal Republic of Germany. A concept known as innere Führung, or inner guidance, was introduced, which was essentially there that German soldiers, officers, NCOs, and enlisted men would live these liberal and democratic values, that they would base their decision-making upon them, that it was never again the case, or it was hoped, that German soldiers would put their personal oath of loyalty, for example, or obedience to orders above respect for human rights. As of course has happened systematically during the time of the Third Reich and the Wehrmacht. So when we look to lines of tradition for the Bundeswehr, historically accepted lines of tradition, there's really only three. The Prussian military reformers of the 19th century around Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the military resistance against Adolf Hitler around Colonel Graf Schenk von Stauffenberg and the plotters of the 20th of July 1944, and then the history of the Bundeswehr from 1954, 1955 onwards itself. However, of course, when we look to the practice, if you will, or the everyday of the armed forces, there are, of course, many German Prussian military traditions that have survived in the Bundeswehr to some extent, from the field gray, that is the color of the army dress uniform, to ceremonies, like we can see here, the Grand Tattoo, the Große Zapfenstreich ceremony, which in its current form dates back to the 19th century, and its earliest antecedents even stretch as far back as the 30 Years' War. And the controversy, if you will, over German military ceremonies such as the Zapfenstreich and public swearing-in ceremonies, the Gelöbnis, has also demonstrated how in Germany, or in West Germany, particularly from the 1980s onwards, there was also a lot of pushback against the military, public displays of what was seen as militarism. While my colleague Frank Stengel is, I think, right in saying that Germany must not necessarily pacifist or pacifist society, there was definitely a very strong anti-militarist sentiment in politics, in media, and society. All right, so fast forward to the second part of this presentation, which sort of what is the state of the Bundeswehr? What is the state of the armed forces? What is the state of German defense and national security today? And here we can see a very enthusiastic Boris Pistorius, then freshly minted or newly minted federal minister of defense. Now, as we recall, the sole mission of the Bundeswehr was to prevent an attack on Western Europe by the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And then in a certain way, one of the worst things that could happen for a military establishment happened. It lost its enemy, right? The Berlin Wall falls, German reunification happens, the Warsaw Pact dissolves, and then finally in 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapses. And so the raison d'etre, if you will, for the Bundeswehr essentially disappeared overnight. And so many European countries, France, Britain, Italy, also the United States, were all cutting the sizes of their armed forces, and they were cutting their defense budgets to a certain extent after the end of the Cold War. So everybody cashed in on the so-called peace dividend, but nowhere maybe where the size of the force and the defense budget cut so heavily and lastingly as in Germany. So the size of the Bundeswehr of now unified Germany, we also had the integration of the East German NVA, the Nationale Volksarmee, where some soldiers were also retained in the service of the Bundeswehr. So the size of the Bundeswehr was actually reduced from 500,000 to 340,000 to 250,000, and then we reached an absolute low point in terms of personnel numbers around the year of 2018, when the Bundeswehr would only muster 178,000 soldiers. This massive tank force that Germany had assembled with 2,200 Leopard 2 main battle tanks was cut by as much as 90%. At one point, Germany had only retained about 220 Leopard 2 main battle tanks. That number is now again being moderately increased towards 300, 350 tanks just about. And as you can see here, in this chart, this loss of combat strength for the Bundeswehr, for the German armed forces, was really quite dramatic. We can see this, for example, that in the year 2000, we still had about 30 artillery battalions that were supporting about twice as much as Panzer and Panzer Grenadier and infantry unit. Now, that number of artillery battalions had dwindled to a grand total of 4 artillery battalions that were supporting 3 full-scale army divisions. So particularly in terms of heavy equipment, combat power, tanks, artillery, infantry, fighting vehicle, we have seen a reduction of 80 to 90%. Luftwaffe fighters, fighter bombers were cut about in half. At the same time, what we saw for the Bundeswehr was essentially a strategic reorientation away from territorial defense with these very heavy, somewhat static armored formations and panzer divisions toward essentially light expeditionary warfare. So in the 1990s, we have the wars on the Balkans. Germany, reunified, acknowledges that it has to take greater political responsibility also in security matters, particularly justified through alliance solidarity. So the idea was that Germany essentially consumed security throughout the Cold War, security that was provided first and foremost by the United States of America. And now Germany has to become a security provider in its own right. So Germany, for example, dispatches peacekeeping forces as part of IFOR, the Bosnia peacekeeping mission that is being put in place after the Dayton peace negotiations. Then we have the Kosovo War from 1999, where Germany, particularly the Luftwaffe, for the first time actually engages in active combat operations as part of NATO airstrikes against Serbian positions in Kosovo and in Serbia. So German ECR Tornado fighter bombers are flying sorties against Serbian air defense positions. And then, of course, we have the big catalyst in terms of the transformation of US foreign and security policy, which is 9/11, which essentially leads to a strategic reorientation of the United States toward counterterrorism, and in particular toward military interventionism to remove the threat that is seen in the presence of so-called rogue states or rogue regimes, as President George W. Bush would refer to them, the axis of evil, like Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and in particular the threat or the potential threat of rogue regimes developing weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, nuclear, passing them on or cooperating with terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda. So in response to 9/11, the Bush administration assembles a coalition of the willing for the invasion first of Afghanistan and later of Iraq. Now, Germany under Chancellor Gerhard Schröder very publicly and vehemently opposes the Iraq war as a dangerous folly and as a misadventure in many of those cautionary warnings, for example, from Joschka Fischer against Don Rumsfeld at the Munich Security Conference, I am not convinced, will later prove to be true. But in Afghanistan, the Bundeswehr will be dispatched. And here we see something interesting, because German strategic culture after the end of the Cold War is essentially guided by two irreconcilable opposites. The first is never again. Never again war, but the other is never again alone. In other words, and to put it a bit more in political science terms, between multilateralism and military reticence. Now, Germany is part of NATO. Germany is one of the closest allies and partners of the UK, of France, and the United States in particular. So when the United States decided to launch the invasion of Afghanistan in retaliation for Al-Qaeda planning and operating from Afghan soil and Afghan territory with the agreement of the Taliban government, Germany, who under Schröder had promised unlimited solidarity to the United States, dispatches the Bundeswehr, right? Following the lodestar, following the strategic guideline of multilateralism. However, at the same time, once in Afghanistan, the second guiding principle comes to bear, and that is the military reticence. So the way that this has played out, for example, is that German troops would take responsibility for the relatively stable north of the country. German forces would not be dispatched to Kandahar and Helmand province, for example, where the fighting against remnants of the Taliban, remnants of the Al-Qaeda network and other criminal networks was the fiercest. And Germany would actually invite a lot of criticism by the UK and the United States, in particular, for essentially sort of like staying in the relatively stable north. And when we are looking to why Germany essentially went into Afghanistan, I would make the case that Germany, like it would later go into Mali, Germany did not go into Afghanistan for genuine national security reasons, in the sense that Germany itself felt threatened. It went into Afghanistan out of alliance solidarity with the United States of America. So the famous quote by Federal Minister of Defense Peter Struck, Minister of Defense from 2002 and 2005, that the security of Germany would also be defended at the Hindu Kush, in my assessment, would not be that Germany itself was directly threatened, but that German national security relies on the partnership with the United States of America. And so in that sense, we had to go into Afghanistan with and in support of the United States of America. At the same time, Germany, for many years, essentially did not acknowledge that it was fighting a war in Afghanistan. It would not be until the Good Friday battle, which has now its unfortunate 13th anniversary, where several German Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, were killed and wounded in action against Taliban fighters, that Germany, under the Merkel government, and then Defense Minister zu Guttenberg, would actually acknowledge that Germany was part of an international conflict in Afghanistan, and subsequently reinforce the troops stationed in Afghanistan with things like Panzerhaubitze 2000 artillery systems and modern infantry fighting vehicles. Ironically, a lot of the same systems that we are now discussing in the context of the Ukrainian war and German military support for Ukraine. And then the next watershed moment is maybe a bit too strong, but the next shift comes in 2014 with Russian interference in eastern Ukraine, Russian support for pro-Russian Ukrainian separatists in eastern Ukraine, and in particular the annexation of Crimea, with the famous little green men, the Spetsnaz special forces, that were staging this coup, and one of the most visible manifestations of what is also known as hybrid warfare strategies by Russia. In response to 2014, Germany essentially initiates a moderate increase in the defense budget. We have a new Weißbuch, a white book on security policy in 2016. We have new guidelines for the Bundeswehr in 2018. And we also have the idea that Germany needs to reorient again toward what it actually was really good at and what it really had a mastery of, which is territorial defense, alliance defense. So the idea is born that Germany would be able to stand up a fully digitized armored division by 2027 and have 3 fully digitized divisions in place by 2032. At the same time, this pre-Zeitenwende turnaround is somewhat done with the handbrake drawn, because as we can see here, military spending increases somewhat after 2014, but it is only a moderate increase. It is only a moderate increase in at best. Now, these plans for 3 digitized formations, a heavy one, a medium one, and a light one, as the latest army plannings are still in place. And the division 2027, as it was known, has actually been now brought forward by 2 years in response to the Russo-Ukrainian war and the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine to 2025. So the idea is that Germany would essentially regain a capability that it had lost during the peace dividend and the severe cuts to the defense budget and the manpower of the Bundeswehr, which is combined arms warfare. That a German division has essentially all the units that it needs in terms of armor, armor infantry, combat helicopters, reconnaissance, artillery, logistics, engineers, command and control, and also air defense, for example. Short air defense, for example, is one of the capabilities that was cut completely. So it wasn't just that German military combat power was reduced after the end of the Cold War, but certain capabilities were lost completely and erased without equivalent. A good example would be the Navy's Tornado fighter bombers, which basically allowed the German Navy to engage in air-to-surface warfare and target ships with anti-ship missiles. This capability was cut completely as a cost-saving measure, as was the phasing out and the elimination of the Heeresflugabwehr, the German Army air defense, with the Roland missile system and the now famous through its quite valiant performance in Ukraine, the Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, or SBAAG. These capabilities were cut in 2010 completely. And to this day, Germany now faces the problem that essentially it has no short-range air defense systems left. And as we have seen in the Russo-Ukrainian war, there is a veritable threat, not just by ballistic missiles, the air threat that was particularly discussed during the Bush administration and the Bush administration leaving the ABM treaty, but the new technology of drones, reconnaissance drones, armed drones, loitering munitions, so-called kamikaze drones. And this capability of short range mobile air defense systems, so anti-aircraft tanks and missile systems that accompany the troops on the battlefield to protect them from aerial attack. This capability now needs to be regained, needs to be revitalized, quite costly. The other story to this cost-cutting measures and these low defense budget is that we have very low levels of readiness of major German combat systems. Partially, this is the reason because German weapon systems were ordered without the spare parts in order to essentially deflate the cost for the systems. So here we have a chart from 2018, for example, and as you can see here, only about a third of the Tornado, of the aging Tornado fighter jet fleet was operational. Only 39 of 128 modern Eurofighter multi-role jets were available. Only 3 transport aircraft. A full 6 of Germany's 6 remaining submarines were inoperable at a time because they were held up in dock with various maintenance issues. The list goes on. About 50% of the Leopard 2 main battle tanks, and a particular story of woe for the Bundeswehr is the low readiness levels of helicopters, both transport helicopters and attack helicopters, such as the Tiger. So in many ways, German soldiers are dealing with outdated equipment. I have some really famous examples here. So for example, the SEM-80, SEM-90 radio system. Why are they called that? Because they're literally from the 1980s and the 1990s. So these are analog systems that don't allow Germany to actually engage in encrypted communication with its NATO allies. On NATO exercises in Lithuania, Norwegian troops have essentially refused to engage in radio communication with their German counterparts in their MARDERs because these are not secure lines of communication. So German soldiers have essentially to shout out of the hatch to the neighboring tanks in order to make themselves understood. The Puma infantry fighting vehicle, the new Schützenpanzer that will replace the Marder, was initially delivered without anti-tank missiles. Again, it was essentially not a combat-ready system, again, in order to cast cut. And particular bone of contention for many soldiers of the Bundeswehr that are active on Twitter under the hashtag #MilTwitter is the Lochkoppel-Tragesystem, the carrying system for German soldiers that, when I think back to my military service from 2000, 2001, I was equipped with, and which is finally phased out now for a modern carrying system. So the result of this 20-year peace dividend is outdated equipment. It is, in many ways, outdated technologies. It's a massive investment backlog for the armed forces. It is low readiness levels of main weapon systems, and it is very small numbers of main weapon systems. And there we really got to talk about the money, because the way that the German defense budget is structured is that it is nowhere near to fulfilling the NATO quota of 20% for investments and equipment. About half of the budget is taken up with running costs, personnel, fuel, spare parts, maintenance, right? Electricity, all of that. And there are actually studies that were done by my colleague Christian Mon from the DGAP that by the end of the decade, the entire German defense budget will be eaten up by these running costs. In other words, there will be nothing left for actual investment, for actually purchasing new systems like regenerating SHORAD, buying new frigates, buying new infantry fighting vehicles, or bringing the existing ones up to snuff. But Germany doesn't just have a problem with not enough money and underinvestment in its armed forces, although it is a structural problem, but the German procurement process is also suffering from over-bureaucratization, from a fragmented decision-making process over various agencies and departments within the Federal Ministry of Defense. Oftentimes, the German military insisting on so-called gold-plated solutions, so not a readily available system that might fulfill 80% of the military tasks that are asked of a system, like a new transport helicopter, but insisting that we are creating the eierlegende Wollmilchsau, that we are having, the best helicopter, the best infantry fighting vehicle in the world, German engineering, which of course then often leads to actually over-engineered products that are so complex that they are prone to break down, that they are more difficult to maintain, and that the cost is spiraling. So we can look to the F-125 stabilization frigate for stabilization missions like counter-piracy, controlling weapons embargoes. We can look to the A-400M transport plane, the Tiger attack helicopter, the NH-90 transport helicopter, the Puma infantry fighting vehicle. The list goes on and on and on. German weapon systems are delivered billions of euros over budget, years too late, and are actually underperforming in terms of the specifications that are supposed to have, and only have to be brought back up to combat readiness, very costly through retrofitting, for example, in the Puma infantry fighting vehicle. And this is also a structural problem that Boris Pistorius, the new Minister of Defense, has addressed when he said that an apparatus in the ministry in Berlin and in the Harthöhe in Bonn that has 3,000 people is, simply put, too large an apparatus. I think on a relatively minor issue that finally ended up on his desk, 27 different signatures, so 27 different people on 27 different levels had looked at this relatively minor issue of, I think, approving a newly designed backpack until it actually appeared on his desk. So in other words, Germany needs more money for its armed forces, but also Germany needs to de-bureaucratize. Germany and the German armed forces and the Ministry of Defense are essentially drowning in a flood of regulation and over-regulation, which essentially counteracts combat effectiveness of the armed forces. Which brings us to the final point for today. Where are we going? What has happened with the Zeitenwende? Is there a Zeitenwende? Is it only rhetoric? Is there actually something materially changing? And there we gotta take a bit of a time travel to 1 year ago. So on the 24th of February 2022, the Russian Federation invades Ukraine on multiple fronts with the strategic goal to essentially eliminate Ukrainian statehood, Ukrainian independence, and to absorb Ukraine territorially into the Russian Federation. In response to this unprecedented violation of the European post-war and post-Cold War order and international law, Chancellor Olaf Scholz gives a special declaration in the Bundestag, in the German parliament, where he describes the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Russian war of aggression as a watershed moment or Zeitenwende in the history of the continent, in the history of Europe. And as a consequence, there will be a structural reorientation, a structural retooling of German foreign, security, and defense policy. One of the most significant results from the Zeitenwende speech are a 100 billion special investment fund or Sondervermögen to address the structural underinvestment of the Bundeswehr as a result of the 20-year peace dividend, the pledge to finally fulfill the NATO target of committing 2% of national GDP for defense expenditures from now on every year, a target that, by the way, we have not met in 2023. We will likely meet in 2024 and 2025, but only thanks to the combination of the Sondervermögen and the regular defense budget. And from 2026 onwards, in order to make good on Scholz's promise, we will have to structurally raise the defense budget, the German defense budget, to something in the vicinity of 65, 68, 70 billion euros. Scholz also announces that Germany would acquire the F-35 strike fighter, a fifth-generation fighter, one of the most modern in Western arsenals, in American fighter jet, in particular in order to continue the nuclear sharing role. That Germany is part of the nuclear deterrence posture of NATO, and that if worse would come to worse and an American president would allow the use of tactical nuclear weapons, German pilots would essentially fly these bombs into their target area. However, the aging Tornado fighter bomber in 1970s design is essentially being kept flying with 3D printed parts and needs urgently to be replaced. Now, this replacement for the Tornado fighter bomber was essentially debated for years. There had been an earlier decision to replace it with the FA-18 and an updated version of the Eurofighter, but not the newest model. So this was Scholz essentially putting an endpoint to a discussion and saying, yes, Germany will modernize the armed forces and Germany will continue in the nuclear sharing role. Similar that Germany would finally buy and purchase armament for Heron TP drones, Israeli-made drones, which essentially are there to provide protection for example, German troops on convoys in operations like Afghanistan and in Mali. Germany also announced, or Scholz also announced, that Germany would break with a historic taboo. It would provide weapons to Ukraine in defense of their national sovereignty and territorial integrity. So Germany would initially begin with light Stinger shoulder-launched air defense missiles and light anti-tank weaponry like the Panzerfaust 3. Later on, it would increase to also include artillery systems like the Mars multiple rocket launcher, the Panzer Howitzer 2000 artillery system, and last but not least, the Marder infantry fighting vehicle and Leopard 2. But only after a very arduous process with terrible strategic communication that actually gave the impression internationally in many circles that Germany wasn't doing anything at all to help Ukraine. Finally, Scholz also announced severe economic sanctions on Russia, a decoupling from Russia in terms of energy matters, and a refocusing of German foreign policy, focusing in particular on strengthening alliances with democratic allies. Now, where are we now? How many of these promises have been materialized? So the F-35, for example, as you can see here in the bottom left corner, has been ordered, in particular to continue in the nuclear sharing role. Germany will also acquire new frigates, not frigates meant for low-intensity conflict like counter-piracy operations, but frigates that are essentially for anti-submarine warfare, for naval warfare. So in particular, looking at the threat of Russian submarines in the North Atlantic and in the North Sea, so the F-126 here. Germany will acquire new submarines. Germany will invest in the Future Combat Air System together with France. And Germany, as I said, will also regrow army capabilities that have been lost. So for example, artillery battalions in the Bundeswehr are set to grow from 4 to 9. Germany will acquire newly wheeled systems for a medium army brigade, such as the wheeled artillery boxer here. And here in the top left corner, we see a new successor to the Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, the Sky Ranger system by Rheinmetall. However, a lot of these systems take actually 2 to 3 years to actually being delivered. And in particular, the first year of the Zeitenwende, when Christine Lambrecht was Minister of Defense, was essentially a lost year because Germany did not even put in orders for the artillery systems like the Mars and the Panzerhowitzer 2000 that it had given to Ukraine. Only now have these replacement systems finally been ordered. Nonetheless, when we ask the question, has there been a Zeitenwende? Then I think it has been an arduous process. It has been, on the side of Scholz, a terribly communicated process in my opinion. I think there has been too much focus on the nuclear threat by Vladimir Putin, which as a military escalation doesn't really make sense because the Ukrainians don't fight in densely packed army formations where the use of tactical nuclear weapons would actually make any sense. But nonetheless, Germany has become one of the most important Western supporters of Ukraine in terms of military equipment. In particular, German-made Gepard systems and IOST SLM systems have proven their value and have been vital to strengthen Ukrainian air defense against the Russian tactic of deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure and Ukraine's energy infrastructure in particular. Marder infantry fighting vehicles and Leopard 2 will now arrive in Ukraine and have arrived in Ukraine together with American systems like the M1 Abrams and Bradley and the British Challenger 2. And this Western military support and German military support is absolutely crucial for enabling Ukrainian counter-offensives. So here you can see, for example, the Gepard and the German-made IOST SLM air defense system in Ukraine, together with American systems like the M777 howitzer, and very famously in the top right corner, the HIMARS multiple rocket launcher that has allowed Ukrainian offensives to succeed around Charkiv, for example, and around Kherson in particular. However, we also need to acknowledge that it is by far and large the military support of the United States that has allowed the Ukrainians to sustain their fight. So of the roughly $50 billion that have been provided by the West, Germany, including to Ukraine in terms of military equipment, by far the largest portion has been provided by the United States of America. So in February 2023, roughly $30 billion have been provided by the United States of America, and the leadership of President Biden has been absolutely crucial, in particular in the regular rounds of the Ukraine contact group where these weapons deliveries are coordinated at Ramstein Air Base. And it was only thanks to President Biden who finally agreed to the dictum set by Olaf Scholz that he cannot send Leopard 2 main battle tanks if not the Americans are also sending their M1 Abrams. Now, there was a lot of resistance against this in the Pentagon. Lloyd Austin, chairman of the Chiefs of Staff, they all said the M1 is not the best tank for the Ukrainians to use. The Leopard is in Europe. It is closer to the theater of operations. It is a bit more fuel efficient. And essentially, President Biden overrode the military resistance in the Pentagon in order to help Olaf Scholz essentially out of a trap of his own making, that Germany can only ever act in lockstep with others. So Germany hasn't really shown leadership on the issue of weapons deliveries so much as often has been an overly cautious approach, an overly fearful approach, if you will. So materially, yes, something has happened. Germany has provided weapons, but at the same time, Germany has not shown the European military leadership role and security leadership role that Scholz himself has essentially hinted at as a result of Zeitenwende in multiple speeches. But again, as you can see here, some of the material overview of weapons donated to Ukraine, Germany has moved into the top 2 or top 3 spot after the United States and the United Kingdom. But this on the material level. Where I also see a result of the Zeitenwende is that Germany in 2023 is for the first time set to actually release a national security strategy modeled after, in particular, the United States, but also other countries like France and Great Britain. And this discussion and this debate of national security strategy involves Parliament, the Bundestag, it involves the federal government, it involves think tanks, civil society. And what I think is a national security strategy also should lead, and was actually intended to lead, to institutional adjustments. So the way the German foreign security and defense policy is planned and coordinated is essentially that we have the regular rounds of the state secretaries, we have the Bundessicherheitsrat, the BSR, however, that is mainly focused on weapons exports and providing the green light for weapons exports, and then we have the Security Cabinet, which is sort of like ad hoc being called. But unlike the National Security Council in the United States, unlike the NSC, we don't have a centralized body, permanent body, for the planning and coordination and implementation of security policy across government, and also a body who is in charge with strategic communication, that is in charge with strategic analysis and foresight. All, in my opinion, areas where Germany is sorely lacking and where Germany should actually restructure itself as a result of the Zeitenwende. However, the latest attempt to get in German National Security Council off the ground has essentially fallen by the wayside. Scholz was never really on board with the idea, seeing it as unnecessary, and essentially Annalena Baerbock from the Greens and Scholz and the Federal Chancellery couldn't agree on where this NSC or German NSC should be located. For what it's worth, my 2 cents is that this is a body that is rightfully located in the White House and not the State Department in the United States, and also in Germany it should belong with the Chancellery, because security belongs to just one ressort. Security is the job of the entire federal government, and so it should be coordinated and planned and implemented by the federal Chancellery. But I think there is a final point to Zeitenwende, and this is how do we discuss matters of security, of national security, of war, of military power, of geopolitics in Germany. And there I think we are seeing a positive sign that one former federal president Horst Köhler once referred to as friendly disinterest by the Germans for their own army and their own armed forces. I don't think this is any longer the case. I think we are seeing a massive interest in the German public. Already, for example, was the fall of Kabul and the evacuation operation in August of 2021, German Fallschirmjäger paratroopers acting there to help evacuate Afghan civilians and international citizens from Kabul. But now in particular, as a result of the Russo-Ukrainian war, as a result of the Zeitenwende, we are seeing, I think, a more mature, more grown-up debate in Germany over, not only do we need armed forces, but what kind of armed forces do we need? We need capable armed forces. We need armed forces that can actually do the job that they're equipped to. And so we are seeing, I would argue, a more adult debate, but there's also a lot of pushback against this, right? Jürgen Habermas, in his essays, has criticized the militarization and the emotionalization of the discourse in Germany. Things like the Frida Leopard campaigns on social media are being criticized as militaristic in nature. We're having the nationalist populist AfD joining hands with the far left, the Linke Party, in essentially criticizing weapons deliveries for Ukraine. We're finding endless calls for negotiations by German public intellectuals, like the feminist publicist Alice Schwarzer, for example. Negotiations where those that call for negotiations never exactly make it explicit what are the grounds for negotiations, how many territorial concessions should the Ukrainians make to essentially reward a Russian war of aggression. Intellectuals that are essentially denying or ignoring the fact that political sovereignty, freedom, democracy, territorial integrity, these are not just values guaranteed by international law, but these are values that the Ukrainians are defending. And if we are refusing to helping them, we are essentially abandoning them to their fate and living under Russian subjugation and Russian domination, with the kidnapping of Ukrainian children, the destruction of Ukrainian homes and Ukrainian infrastructure, the attempt of Russia to essentially eliminate Ukraine and wipe it off the map. And I think in particular in the German debate, as a result of Zeitenwende, political scientists such as myself, bodies like the Atlantische Akademie, German think tanks, we need to push back against those very cozy narratives that we Germans have told about ourselves and our place in the world. Wandel durch Handel, Ostpolitik, Zivilmacht, Germany as a civilian power, that we are only surrounded by friends, that we sort of ended up in this Kantian post-1989 space of a perpetual democratic peace. Essentially, Germany had outsourced its security to partners like the United States of America, but that outsourcing is no longer possible. It is not adequate to Germany's political significance and economic clout within the European Union, but it is also dangerous, because if we don't provide for our own defense and we do not invest into our own defense, we are directly putting water on the wheels. We are directly supporting the argument by Donald Trump and other nationalist populists in the United States and the Republican Party that essentially want to abandon NATO. So if we don't invest in our defense, why should the United States continue to protect us and continue to invest in NATO. So these are discussions that I think that we have to have. I think we also need to acknowledge our own responsibility, if not culpability, in pushing for economic engagement with Russia, in claiming that Nord Stream 1 and 2 were a purely economic project, which they were clearly not. They were clearly a geopolitical project for Russia. Our underinvestment into our own armed forces, the state of our military. I think the German foreign policy establishment has a lot to answer for, and I hope as a result of Zeitenwende, we will become a bit less smug and a bit less egocentric, and we will also listen to the Poles and the Baltic states and the Finns that have now joined NATO when they talk about their security concerns over Russia, and not just brush this off. So I think that Zeitenwende, if you will, is also a bit of an ideational or a discursive intervention against the dogmas of the past, and a little bit the convenient lies that we have told ourselves in Germany and Germans about how we have learned the lessons of history and how we have sort of pacified. And this is not at all about the return of a neo-Wilhelmine Germany or a militarist Germany, but we need to reorient and redefine German national security as the military reassurance of our friends and neighbors and partners in Europe. Only then will the Zeitenwende be a success, and only then will Germany be able to answer the threat posed by the neo-imperial and authoritarian powers of the 21st century. For those of you who have now been bitten by the Zeitenwende bug, I have here the cover of our upcoming book with the Kohlhammer Verlag that will appear at the end of April, a German edited volume where my colleague Malte Riemann and I were lucky to assemble a who is who of security scholars, defense scholars, military sociologists that are looking at the Zeitenwende from various historic, strategic, and military viewpoints. And it is meant as a general introduction to readers for some of the topics that I have discussed here today. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Georg, for this really clear and fascinating presentation. And I'm happy to repeat my invitation to all of you to participate in our discussion. And then I can see that we have some experts in the audience. And so there are at least two remarks and questions, and I will read it to you. The first comes from Falk Ostermann. So hello, Falk. Great that you. Russia's war on Ukraine while window dressing our response to the war's needs only. So I would stop here. So if you like, Georg, you can also read the question under the moderated button.
I'm so sorry. I lost you there for a crucial 30 seconds. Could you maybe repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So he wrote that that you pointed out one factor of, or one part of the Zeitenwende, and he just want to stress the political level. And his question is there a Zeitenwende on the political level? Do ideas really change and policy with them? And this is something which I thought a little bit that that there is maybe to some extent the understanding that there has to be change, but is there really the readiness, and are the political actors really willing to do so?
I mean, I would say this is an evolution rather than rather than a revolution, right? I mean, we have seen this in this very sort of step-by-step process in the weapons deliveries, right? Germany acting very cautiously, Germany not wanting to get out in front. So I think these ideas around military reticence, they are still there. But I would also say that there is a difference here in how different parties have reacted to the Zeitenwende. So I think that the Greens, for example, under Baerbock, under Habeck, have been very forceful in their support for Ukraine, have been very forceful in their support for weapons deliveries, for example. Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann from the FDP as well. Where I see greater reluctance is really by Scholz within the SPD, which of course, still has this label of the peace party, where this pacifism or anti-militarism or military reticence, whatever we want to call it, is maybe most structurally part of their identity, and of course also where the narratives of Ostpolitik, Wandel durch Handel, right, engagement through economic partnership, particular with Russia, Egon Bahr, these things are really part of the social democratic identity, and there is, I think, a bit of a reluctance to kill all of your darlings now. But on the other side, we also have to acknowledge that, well, when we talk about Wandel durch Handel, when we talk about Ostpolitik, I mean, for example, Egon Bahr was, looking at Solidarność and were essentially saying, well, I prefer stability over freedom in the 1980s. So I think we have a very sort of narrow view in Germany of reunification, of Gorbachev, of this lingering gratitude for the role of the Soviet Union, and not, crushing the demonstrations in Leipzig and East Berlin like they did in 1953. But this is also not necessarily the historic narratives of the Poles, for example, or the Baltic states. So I think we need to Europeanize a little bit our strategic narratives. But of course, I mean, institutional continuity in personnel, when we think about Frank-Walter Steinmeier being a major architect behind the engagement policy with Russia under Angela Merkel. I mean, the CDU, CSU under Merkel. I mean, I always say this was the very, very big coalition. Underinvestment in the armed forces, strategic partnership with Russia. So I think there really is nobody here without blame. But I think it is not maybe so much about blame even, but acknowledging political responsibility, and that a lot of our political strategies that we have pursued over the last 20 years have misfired, and misfired quite spectacularly when we're looking at the results, when we're looking at the results now.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to go a little bit further. So, and with regard to society, and when we have seen a first, so you already said, and it's the same point Frank Stengel made. German society was and is not pacifist, but rather follows the culture of a civilian power.
Yeah.
And we have seen a first broader interpretation of civilian power in the course of the Kosovo War, when Joschka Fischer convinced his own Green Party to take up arms by saying that it is not enough to say never again war or never alone. But he added that Germany also had a responsibility to prevent a recurrence of genocide. So never again Auschwitz.
Yeah.
So what do you think? How difficult is it to either discard this culture at all, or to redefine it more broadly, to give it a further meaning, so to speak?
I think, ironically, when we talk about Zeitenwende and a watershed and a turnaround, ironically, I think in a certain way, Germany is sort of like going back to what it actually did in the 1980s, right? It is this conventional backbone, it is this territorial army, an army for defense, but just now the fault line no longer goes through Germany, but now we are having a battalion on a rotational basis in Lithuania, right? We're having Patriot air defense batteries in Slovakia. We are doing air policing on the Baltic states. We're having sort of a fast reaction brigade standby in Europe for the eastern flank. So I think this reassurance, deterrence, actually is making a comeback. And I think this is something where this combination of multilateralism and military reticence actually quite nicely overlaps. We have capable military forces that are there to deter an attack, but they're not necessarily going into controversial missions like Afghanistan and Mali, fought for, nation building, democracy export, and such. So I think one of a result of all of this is that the age of the Auslandseinsatz is coming to an end, and we're sort of turning the page again. At the same time, I think it would also be dangerous if Germany would only focus on that, right? The federal government has released an Indo-Pacific strategy. Germany will also undertake these reassurance missions by sending, for example, a frigate into the Pacific Ocean, the Luftwaffe training with Australia. But I think the most controversial aspect of German military engagement were combat missions like in Afghanistan. And I don't see anybody really repeating this experiment anytime soon, right? The French went out of Mali. The United States closed the book in Afghanistan after a 20-year engagement. The Iraq War ended in political failure. And so I think this idea of a defensive army, of an army for alliance defense, of a deterrence army, that is one that also for the majority of the German population is acceptable, and also one that the majority or all the mainstream parties can get on board with. And so I think we are seeing a new societal consensus that we need a capable army, a modern army, a well-equipped army, a well-funded army, in order to provide security for our friends and our partners, so that Finland and Poland and Estonia do not fall the way that Ukraine has fallen to Russian aggression.
Yeah, thank you. So another question goes out to you by Kurt Hermann. He wrote, against the background of rapidly evolving hybrid risks and threats which dissolve the traditional borders between external and internal threats, there is an urgent need for a combined structure of national security authority. A National Security Council, he writes, with subordinate steady bodies for command and control operating 24/7 seems to be mandatory. Would you agree to this view?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we do have monitoring bodies, right? We have the Einsatzführungskommando and we have Krisenstab und Auswärtigen Amt, and I think what we lack really is this sort of like integration and this coordination across government. And of course, this is difficult because we have coalition governments, which are the norm. We have the Ressortprinzip. So this National Security Council structure that exists in the United States and in the White House with their presidential system, we can't just translate that to Germany because our political culture and institutions are different. But I think what we can definitely do is we can improve on the way that we do strategic analysis, that we do strategic communication, and the way we cooperate and implement these things. I mean, it could be that we just have the Kanzleramtsminister, for example, will act as sort of de facto national security advisor. But I think Germany needs to up its game, I think, institutionally. And I think we can look to France, we can look to UK. I mean, pretty much everybody has a body of that stature. I think the idea was always, we don't need that. We never done it like that, and also when push comes to shove, the Brits and the French and the Americans are taking care of it. But I think that no longer works. I think we have to wear our big boy pants now and say, well, we also have to take care of it, essentially.
Yeah, right. So maybe one thing about you already mentioned the at least in these times, the importance of certain institutions, of course, of certain observers and experts, and the question or the discussion about the National Security Council is one example of this broader strategic thinking, which comes to life or has come to life in the last couple of weeks. So to go or to take a step back, has the hope of this peace dividend not only determined action in the appropriate or not appropriate equipping of the Bundeswehr, but also completely maybe overlaid or maybe overridden strategic thinking in Germany at all. So that's from my perspective, it's a huge problem.
Absolutely. And I think it is no coincidence that, German scholars are doing security studies, doing military studies, are often found in universities abroad. I mean, when I look to our Sammelband, some of our authors, Gustav Maybauer is at the Radboud University in the Netherlands. My co-editor Malte Riemann is in Glasgow. Was at Warwick, now I'm in Queen Mary University, London. And of course, this is part with this intellectual non-engagement with war and military and geopolitics, all of which was seen as somewhat, to use this German word, anrüchig. It was a little bit in the Schmuddelecke, let's say. And we have fantastic think tanks in Germany. We have the SWP, we have the DGAP, we have the European Council on Foreign Relations. There is brilliant work that is being done at the Bundeswehr University in Munich and Hamburg, and in the Institute for Friedensforschung and Konfliktforschung in Frankfurt and in Kiel. But it is not a very broad, it's not a very deep bench. And I think, security studies at German universities, you really have maybe 4 or 5 universities where you can go to, where you can actually study this. At Warwick University, where I taught for many years, we had undergraduate and master programs on intelligence studies, on terrorism, on US foreign policy and national security, on war in the 21st century. And this was just, this is just one university. So there is a much, much greater breadth of security research, strategic studies, military studies in countries like the UK and the United States, which of course, they have also a completely different culture, different strategic culture. First of all, they have essentially a victory culture, right? Whereas we have a culture of complete defeat, unconditional surrender, and a complete political, economic, moral collapse that is the Second World War. But I think, or I would hope, that as a result of Zeitenwende, we are overcoming a little bit this idea that this is sort of not done in Germany because we are a civilian power and we don't deal with these things. I think we need to intellectually engage with these things. I think we need more expertise. And I also would hope that, we can also answer this increased public engagement and public interest by saying, yeah, there is more study programs in Germany. We have more professorships, we have more postdocs, we have more research funding for security-related things. And for me, this absolutely includes critical security studies, feminist foreign policy, post-colonial perspectives. Security isn't just hard power and realism and Meersch, right? I mean, security essentially is our perception and what makes you feel secure. We have a whole literature on ontological security and how do people feel secure because their sense of identity, their sense of self is stable. So I would really hope that as a result of the Zeitenwende, we see a lot more of that security research and engagement in the media, publicly, in schools, in universities, with the whole topic of national security, everything that entails.
Yeah, great, thanks. Another question is about the more practical view on German Zeitenwende and maybe German military. Horst Schmidt, he writes, the insourcing of military capacities or capabilities also requires the Bundeswehr to be staffed. Where are the soldiers supposed to come from?
Yeah. And that is putting the finger right on the wound there. So the official target still is that the Bundeswehr is set to grow to, I think, 203,000 soldiers by 2031. And most experts, officers that I have talked to, that I have spoken to, say that this is unrealistic, that we can't meet these recruitment targets. So what is there to do? Well, one would be that we actually restructure the Bundeswehr internally. So, for example, we don't just have 3 branches of the military, Army, Navy, and Air Force. So here, Marine, Luftwaffe. Then we have 5 organization areas. So we have the Streitkräftebasis, which is essentially centralized logistics, NBC, military police, and then we have the medical service. And now we also have a space command, and we have a cyber command. And we have too many captains and not enough people who actually rowed a ship. And this is, of course, something that happens to every organization. Very famously, the Royal Navy, had more admirals than it actually had ships at one point. But the Bundeswehr is incredibly, incredibly top-heavy. A lot of soldiers don't actually really have what we would say are military tasks, but they are essentially administrative tasks. And I think one way to acknowledge these demographic challenges is to essentially slim down the Bundeswehr, get rid of some of these Organisationsbereiche, slim down the entire command level. I think Boris Pistorius has already moved in this direction when he said, we can reduce from 370 positions on the leadership level, on the Leitungsebene in the ministry, down to, I think it was 160 or 180 or something like that. So that would be, I think, one way to respond to this. And another is also we will see increasingly unmanned systems, right? We're going to see aerial drones. We're going to see unmanned land systems, underwater drones. So the German Navy has released a new, I think, target for 2035, where a lot of, for example, German submarines will be augmented by these systems. But of course, there we have the perennial guest of the German security debate, which is the Wehrpflichtdebatte. Do we need to bring back the Wehrpflicht? And there, of course, we need to say that if we bring back a Wehrpflicht, if we bring back conscription, it cannot be male only. It would be then women and men that are being called up. And it, of course, would also inquire, again, a social or civilian equivalent. And this only makes sense if we build up the structures again to deal with this. So, the 40,000 soldiers that we need as drill instructors and trainers and all of that. So at the moment, I don't see this. I think at the moment, the money would be better invested in having maybe a smaller Bundeswehr, maybe just one that is 185,000, but one that really has all the equipment it needs, and it's technological at the top level, at the top 3 in Europe, in terms of cyber, in terms of ammunition reserves, in terms of digitization of command and control and communications. So I would say, more, maybe smaller, but with more punch than what we have at the moment.
Yeah, great, thanks. Another question we have from Mr. Schneider. He wrote that can the application for NATO membership by long-time neutral Finland and Sweden work as a wake-up call for Germany's military reticence towards a wehrhafte Demokratie? Oh, that's interesting.
I think, in particular, Finland is quite impressive, right? When we look at the Finnish system, for example, of their reserves and how many they can call up. I think that especially the accession of Finland and hopefully also soon Sweden would also mean that Germany will have to make good on, for example, its leadership promise, but Germany has the largest navy in the Baltic Sea, for example, which will essentially become almost a NATO lake when we are looking now at all the countries, all the Baltic countries, is save for Russia. So, and I think the Finns in particular will bring a certain seriousness to debate and, not very misty-eyed illusions about Russia. I read an essay by Ulrike Guerreau the other week where she talks about Bolshoi and Dostoevsky and all these Russen cliches that Karl Schlögl always criticizes. And I think the Finns are the last people who are engaged in Russen kitsch. So I think we're going to have a healthy dose of Finnish realism here that I think will also be a good injection into the German debate, where we tend to be sometimes very navel gazing, I think.
Here is another question, a great question, which came to my mind also in the course of your presentation. A question by Kurt Hermann. He under the impression of the MAGA politics of former President Trump and the growing tension between the U.S. and China, would the German foreign and security policy not need to take a much firmer stance within a more sovereign common European policy? And I would add to that that during in the aftermath or in the course or in the wake of the Trump administration, many observers, me included, have pointed out that German strategic thinking and security posture will also have to change fundamentally because the reliability of the US has suffered severely. And my impression was that some statements from Berlin have at least given me the impression that this insight has also reached them.
Yeah.
But have we made any progress at all in this regard? So
No.
yeah.
I mean,
unfortunately.
I think we are historically fortunate that we have a President Biden who brings a level of foreign policy expertise through his long political career in the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, a commitment to the NATO alliance, a commitment to partnership with Germany. He knows Germany very well. He's been a regular guest at the Munich Security Conference. But when I look to my work, for example, on Trump and Trump's foreign policy of America first, then Trump had approval ratings of more than 80% among Republican voters. And when we look to American public opinion, then after the end of the Afghanistan war, we can see a clear majority of Americans that want less military interventions. They want a more restrained foreign policy. They are happy to still exert leadership, but leadership in partnership with other nations, what Barack Obama would refer to as burden sharing. And for me, the worst strategic mistake that we can make in Germany is to essentially just go back to sleep and pretend nothing has happened. And to just do business as usual, because these are societal, structural, also demographic changes in the United States of America. It is clear from everything that we see from the national security strategy of the United States, the recent one released in 2022, the United States sees itself in an age of strategic rivalry and geopolitical long-term antagonism, with China first and foremost on their mind in the Asia-Pacific, politically, militarily, economically. And what subsequent American presidents will expect, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and God help us if Donald Trump gets re-elected in 2024 or Rob DeSantis, is that Germany, the richest, most populous country in Europe, will need to be a provider of security in Europe. Our geographic location, we are essentially doomed to lead, not to dictate, but we are doomed to provide credible military security for the continent. And I don't think that we have completely internalized what is coming toward us. And the worst case scenario of a America First president withdrawing the United States from NATO, then we are not discussing 2 or 2.5 or 3% of GDP for defense for Germany. We're discussing more like 4-5% of GDP, because without the Americans, without their enablers, without their satellites, their intelligence resources, surveillance, we will have to stand up these capabilities on a European Union level, and those are investments that dwarf everything that we are discussing. The 100 billion Sondervermögen is a drop in the bucket, essentially. But even without the United States withdrawing from NATO, Germany will have to step up its game, and we need to structurally raise the defense budget to, at the very least, 2% of GDP, which is, I think, the absolute bottom level of what we need to equip the Bundeswehr and to make our promises to NATO and the EU and our partners credible.
Yeah, thank you. There is only one question left in in the system, so it's by Horst Schmidt-Jelin. It's a kind of a follow-up question to the Wehrpflicht aspect and issue. I mean, he asks, Wehrpflicht would then also apply to the new citizens from Syria, Ukraine, and so on. Do we want that? So, security question.
I think there is I think it still needs to be tied to German citizenship, but I think what can be is EU citizens, for example, being allowed to serve in the German armed forces, kind of like akin to, for example, you can join the U.S. military as a green card holder, right? And then that can also be a path to citizenship. So I think dual citizenship, EU citizenship, I think we would sort of have to debate around these issues. Yeah.
Yeah. He added something in a completely, I think, different area, so to speak, but it's quite interesting. Would you please say, so his question, say something about the BRICS development, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So maybe the direction is that we have a Western united front, but there are a lot of countries who are ambivalent, to put it mildly.
And I think we shouldn't underestimate that, right? I mean, India, Russia is one of their largest suppliers of weapons. Xi Jinping and Putin, are rhetorically at least cementing their partnership, although the Chinese are also pretty much sitting on the fence on this whole thing. But of course, when we look to Taiwan, Xi Jinping has announced that he wants to reunify, in his words, bring back Taiwan by force was necessary by the middle of the 21st century. What we are seeing is essentially increasingly a division between liberal democracies and authoritarian populist powers in the world. And Modi, for example, is a nationalist populist of the same ilk as a Bolsonaro or a Rodrigo Duterte or a Donald Trump, for that matter. So, it is not that our perception of the Russian invasion and the Russian aggression is necessarily a global or universal one. And this is where I think, this idea, for example, in Scholz's Zeitenwende speech, that we need to invest less in our economic partnership with authoritarian powers and invest more in our political, economic, and military partnership with democratic allies like Japan, like Australia. That is exactly the right idea.
Yeah, thank you, Georg, for all your remarks and your answers to a lot of questions. I think the time is almost over, so it remains for me to thank you all. Thank you for your participation. Thank our partners for a great cooperation, and most importantly, many thanks to you, Georg, for your great presentation and a lot of food for thoughts. So thank you. And I would like to take this opportunity to conclude this evening by wishing you all a happy Easter and a wonderful holiday season. I would also like to draw your attention to our further program, as well as our German language podcast, Amerikas Verfassung, so America's Constitution. So take care and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.